Hola a todos, yo soy Mariela. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to talk to you about why I'm not a photographer anymore and what my journey was like and why I felt like I needed to quit. So if we back up a little bit, I actually became interested in photography when I was just 14 years old. I don't know what it was about it back then, but I felt really drawn to the composition of a photo, trying to capture objects, subjects, people, everything. I was just naturally drawn to it from the beginning. And then fast forward to college, where I actually took my first photography class. This was probably when I was 20 or 21 years old, and the class was actually a film class. So I learned all about the history of photography, the process. I got to do the historical process of how photography started. Well, not technically, because it started with taking photos on a, what do they call it, 9x10 camera, on a plate with chemicals. So that was the original process for photography. But what followed and what made it possible to be commercialized was shooting it on 35mm film, which is what that class was. And when I took that class, let me tell you, is when I realized and when I accepted that, maybe photography is something that I might want to do or something that I could do professionally. And so this class was in community college. And by the time that I transferred to the University of Houston, I started a BFA program. But in order to get into the program, I had to take what they call a portfolio review class, which basically trains you for being in the program. And that means that you have to create projects with a theme or an idea. For example, I did a project on gentrification, which was not accepted. The first time that I tried to get into this program, I was denied. But my project on gentrification was focused on the architecture of the homes in Houston, which Houston has very poor zoning laws, so you get a lot of random buildings next to each other. But gentrification started to become more and more obvious with the larger 3-story townhomes next to the small, dilapidated original homes. And so my project was based on capturing them side by side and making a commentary on how it's changing the landscape in Houston. And for whatever reason, maybe it's a political reason, they did not like that project. And so I did not get in the program the first time I tried out. Thankfully, this class was in the spring, and I had one more chance in the fall to take the class again so that I could start the program in the spring. Otherwise, I was going to miss out on an entire year of being in this art program, and I probably would have graduated a year and a half after I did. Which, if you think about it, it's crazy to create a program that won't allow you to graduate for a year and a half if you don't get in the program. I mean, I still have a lot of is that the word? Strife about that arts program. I felt like it was lacking a little bit in, first of all, the business of art and helping us understand what the real world is like being an artist. I felt like we were sold an idea that if you worked hard, your work was going to be shown, right? But let's go back. I'm getting ahead of myself. So the second portfolio review class that I took, I actually made a project on my family dynamics, which of course they love because they just wanted to know all the tea and the drama in your life. And this really taught me how I can use photography as a voice and make sure that when I'm taking a photo, that what I'm saying is clear and not misconstrued. So that's one takeaway from this experience that I will say I'm grateful for, or one lesson that I learned that stuck with me is using photography as a channel for communication. So I got into the program, yay! And this was about 2014. I started in the spring of 2015, and it was hell. It kicked my ass. It wasn't what I expected in terms of, like I said earlier, I was expecting more from the program education-wise. And I remember some of the professors that I had, even before I got into the program, for example, didn't want to show us how to export from Premiere Pro because they taught themselves. Yet here I am paying $1,600 a class and not receiving an education that I'm paying for. So you can see I'm still resentful about this whole art school thing. And one thing that I didn't love about the art school program is that it was steering us in only one direction, which was to be the kind of artist that has works shown in galleries and museums, which is great if that's your goal and you want to achieve that. Personally, I thought I did as well. And for those of us that maybe don't aspire to be in galleries or museums, I felt we should have had the business side of art, like I said, classes or courses on how to sell ourselves as artists professionally and not be taken advantage of. That was not covered at all. And so once I graduated from this program, after a year and a half of continuously doing these projects centered around the theme and then finally having a thesis project, I graduated thinking that I was actually going to go to graduate school. And looking back, like, I never would have survived. But that's the idea that I was fed, that I was supposed to be this artist that continues learning academically on how to be an artist, to show my work in galleries and museums. That's what I thought I wanted. But my body of work at the time was all based on my personal problems with my family, with myself. One of my last projects was about the lack of friends that I had, how I do things alone all the time, which is true to this day. But I just felt like that kind of work was too personal for me to put out there into the world. It's okay for people in art school to see it, but I just didn't feel comfortable creating an entire body of work after graduation that was about my personal issue. And to mention that all those photos were obviously self-portraits of myself, so I don't really want to sell myself like that. And so post-graduation, I obviously don't continue doing projects. I was working full-time very quickly. I was promoted at the company where I was working, which was a real estate photography company. So I was still involved with photography, just not in the art way that I was taught. And occasionally I would do portraits of myself, and I also started exploring different types of photography that I might want to do. I've always loved architecture, started taking more photos of architecture in Houston. I decided that maybe architecture wasn't an avenue for me to make money as a photographer, so I started exploring photographing people. This was around 2020 when I shifted from architecture / interior design photography to doing people, because I wanted to be this famous fashion photographer. I was gonna be in Vogue, I was gonna be on all the covers, and at that time I started to find a lot of people that were truly inspirational. None that looked like me, or none that had the same origins as me, but still I felt like watching these people make their dreams come true made it possible for me to also one day be self-employed and travel the world and be hired by agencies and magazines and everybody. And so it became my goal to develop a portfolio that brands would want to hire me for. And so I continuously worked on that, but it got to the point where I realized that Houston was not the right city for me to be in creatively. I could tell early on that kind of career that I wanted to have would not be born in that city. And so in the spring of 2021, I came to visit Miami. I have family that lives here. At the time, I had reconnected with a high school friend, so I stayed with her, we were hanging out. And I can tell you, it was a moment of, I don't know the word, but it was a moment of like, hurrah, or realization that I think this is where I'm supposed to be. And so when I got home, I immediately started planning my move. And by November that year, 2021, I was here in Miami. No, it was December that I came to Miami with the goal to be freelance and continue to grow and evolve my portfolio so that I eventually can get a cover photo shoot. And so once I got here, I was living with my aunt. So it helped that I didn't need to work. I was living off of my savings. I had quite a bit at that time. So I started networking with photographers that I was already following before I moved here. I started working with one of them as an assistant, which now he sold a photographer program to a well-known photo editing app. That's a whole nother thing. But most of 2022 until about August, I was doing what they call test shoots, which is basically free photo shoots. And fun fact, probably 90% of my portfolio is test shoots. When it comes to my portraits and editorial style photos, I have one paid photo shoot for a water brand, which was called Kopu Water, and I found them through Craigslist. So as you can imagine, after months and months of doing these free shoots, I was also, through that photography program that I mentioned earlier, trying certain strategies to get retainer clients for snack brands. I would go to the grocery store, buy the snack or the beverage, take photos of the product, then pitch it to the brands, And as a result, I actually got a meeting with one brand, but the guy was not having it. I also wasn't very confident in what I was selling. I was trying to get a $1,500 a month contract to have a photo shoot so that they can have content for their social media. But it was like, no, it's just not very kind. I did have one brand send me water so that I can do additional photo shoots, but my rates were outside of their budget, which looking back, I probably could have negotiated like an $800 thing to start with. And so, as you can imagine, after all these months of trial and error, I eventually was running out of money and had to go back to work. And I actually journal extensively in this 5-year diary that I have every day. And I'm gonna pull up the journal entry from the day that I quit photography. It was September 8th, 2022. And I wrote, today, 5:14 a.m., I quit. My dream is dead. Actually, I wrote, the dream is dead. What happened that night was I had done a photo shoot the day before for some rich family. They were so stupid rich, and I was just shooting their mom's birthday pictures. This was before I even started working at the Windward Walls, so I was working a part-time job. I was really struggling at this time, and it just became obvious to me that my dream was dead. Like I wrote in that journal, and I woke up at 5:14 a.m. Like I said, I know I looked at the time, that's why I wrote it, and I put all my gear in a closet and never wanted to look at it again. And it was completely devastating. I mean, I was having a total mental breakdown because it felt like what I came here to Miami to accomplish didn't happen. And it was even more discouraging watching people around me accomplish the one thing that I wanted, which was a freelance career. And what's so funny is that today I'm unemployed and I'm kind of veering towards a freelance career because the job market sucks. But after having gone through everything I went through, it's not something that I'm really interested in because of its instability. I love PTO, 401k, a steady paycheck that I get every 2 weeks. But at the same time, corporate job is probably less stable than having a freelance career. And so after I put all my gear in a closet, started working a stable job, and I just focused all my energy on that, which it completely drained any energy that I had. And I might still make a video to talk about that traumatizing experience. Eventually, I actually started using my gear for photo shoots at work. I was doing some products for the shop. The family also owns a restaurant, so I was doing food photography. So I was doing photo shoots, but obviously not paid. And always when I traveled, I would obviously take I have a Sony A7 III, and my favorite lens is a 50mm Zeiss, and I would take my camera everywhere I went. And at some point I thought maybe I could be a travel photographer, but again, I was just taking photos that nobody was ever going to see. And because I would come up with this excuse that I don't take photos, or the photos I take I don't really like because my camera is so heavy, coming up with excuses as to why I'm not successful at it, I actually bought a small Sony X100V so that when I do travel, I'm able to easily capture more travel photos, or maybe more photos of people and fashion, etc. But still, I don't take photos. Now, the kind of photographer I am, I'm just kind of don't know how to describe what I am. In recent times, I did a photo shoot for wedding dress designer. I also did an interior design photo shoot for the one client I was able to get throughout all this time, and potentially we might start working together on me managing her social media and shooting some content for her social media. But as far as my original dream, which was to be a fashion photographer and obviously travel the world and be booked and busy, I think that dream honestly is just a dream. So there you have it. That is why I had to quit photography. You can only do so much. You can only try so hard. Sometimes it's just not meant to be.